I work with, I really respect their knowledge base. I don't want to be a doctor, I want to be a midwife, but I know that we can work collaboratively, brilliantly. We've done it. We've been both in the room. I've transferred to her. We've had no enmity between us, and I want the woman giving birth to have that. Why should the woman giving birth have to read these subtle cues about who's better and who knows more when we can collaborate? I mean, really, that's my dream. So there you go.
Actually, Cara, let me just, I want to hear what you have to say too, but Cara, just to go back to the anecdotal idea, can you just speak a little bit about the hospital transfer in the movie, because that was something that we talked about beforehand, that people did have questions about, that was sort of a lingering thing.
That's becoming a very familiar subject the more I'm interviewed. Yeah, well, I think that scene was probably edited for drama by the filmmakers in a way that made it very interesting and kind of scary and exciting. But there were a few, clarifications that actually, Abby and I are friends, so I've spoken to her about this. But when I go on the road and entertain questions about the movie, a lot of questions come up, and a couple of one of the questions is, it's kind of a long story. I don't know that that it might be too boring, but what I feel is that being that I'm the midwife in that situation where we transfer Abby very appropriately, the general public perceives that situation as, wow, you can have a baby at home, something could go wrong, you can get to the hospital, have your cesarean, everything's fine. So that's one road that people go down. It really comforts and they feel like, wow, so she can handle stuff. It kind of ties that black and white thing about everything has to go good at home, and if it doesn't, just everything could go really badly and there's no one attending to it. But there were some things that happened in the scene that I think kind of reflected potentially poorly clinically. For example, and she would understand this, whereas most people don't necessarily get this, that Abby came to me, only had 2 prenatal visits before she went into labor. We weren't planning on having a breech at home. Some people say, well, why was she laboring with a breech at home? We weren't doing that. She was 35 weeks, 5 weeks early, and I went to her house. She lives in my neighborhood without my car. That's another thing in Washington. They said, well, why did she take a cab to the hospital? And like, if you lived in New York, you'd understand that it was actually an intelligent move. Because if I had to circle Avenue A and 4th Street for 2 hours, I would have missed the transfer. So I took a car service to her house so I didn't have to park, just to figure out if she was in labor. Figured out she was in labor, but even that takes a minute. So people are like, why is she keeping her at home? Which we weren't. I mean, the time is also slowed down. So it's probably 1 hour that we were at her house. When I came out, she was in the bathtub. To get out, I need to check you. I need to introduce the thought gently that this may get transferred, you may be in labor. By the time I checked her, which was like 20 minutes after I got there, I knew she was in labor and I had already made my decision. And then Abby, on the way out the door, before, she didn't understand. A lot of people also don't understand transfer because she's in her tranced out labor state. And so she's like, so Paolo, let's get the toothbrush. I'm like, Abby, we don't have time for the electric toothbrush. We have to go. Your water breaks. So, all of that doesn't necessarily come through in terms of my clinical management. So I've had to feel the need to clarify. I don't know that the general public necessarily picks up on that or feels that I need to clarify, but I feel the need to clarify in my own defense of my clinical judgment call.
I think we need to move to questions. Before we do that, I want to point out that Cara's book is for sale on that part of the store, and then after a question and answer session, she'll be here if you'd like to have your copy signed. And now I'd like to open up questions from the audience. Yes?
Hi, so I'm having a home birth, and I think that my decision was based on I wanted care, not maintenance. I wanted to be cared for. But now I feel like they've given me back my pregnancy, and it's my responsibility, but I'm a little overwhelmed with it because I feel like there's so much lying on me. How can I avoid being my worst enemy at labor?
Did everybody hear that? Yes? Okay. So how can she avoid being her own worst enemy during labor?
Besides nutrition, like prepare, mentally, emotionally prepare.
I think that no matter how many childbirth education classes you take and books you read, labor is always a shock. That's the truth. And it's important to have, I think the best preparation is to really feel that you've created a relationship of trust with your caregiver. And if that means getting some ghosts out of the closet, like I always encourage that at my visits. You know, what are you worried about? If I find that someone's worried about something, I give them lots of different scenarios on how we might deal with this. I mean, it depends on what psychological attributes you possess. You know, if we had a relationship, I might be able to speak to those individual attributes. You know, some people are control freaks. Some people don't even think that they might have a transfer or ever have a cesarean. So if you were that type of a person, I would try to encourage you to take a tour of the hospital if I felt that you were really in denial about that option. Because the one truth that really pervades pregnancy and childbearing is that we are not in control. Nor I, nor you. So we do the best with the forces at hand. We strengthen you. Nutrition is great. And walking is great. Walking is a wonderful thing to do because gravity has a huge influence on a baby descending through your pelvis. And then also to realize that you may go through several transmutations of character and state of mind and state of being until you get to the end. And there may be some forests you have to walk through where you can't see clearly, wherein you really need to have someone that you can trust. So if I were to say to you, we need a section, and anecdotally, I know I have a very low section rate, but I had one mom whose mom was sectioned. We'll try to make it short, but it's a great story. Her mom was sectioned. She came to home birth. It's like, I'm not doing that, because they told her pelvis was inadequate and she had a section. Guess what? She went to 41 weeks. Her baby had decreased fetal movements. The only person in 20 years that's ever been sectioned for this indication. So don't let it, as a pregnant mom, either freak you out. So the day after I saw her, said the baby has decreased fetal movement, I said, go to St. Vincent's, let's check on the baby. The baby was having what we call bradycardia, so that means it wasn't really okay in there. And she looked down the end of the bed at me. I was standing in front, and she goes, why do I have to have a section? I said, Anushka, this is why we have medical intervention. You're having a necessary cesarean. This is wonderful. And then when she woke up, she said, Cara, why couldn't my body do it? And I said, Anushka, you are the reason why you have a live baby. Your connection with your child brought you to call me, brought me to send you to St. Vincent's, and our wonderful perinatalist just there who sped things along to her getting a section, and Sasha, who's now 5. I said, thank you so much. And he said, don't thank me, thank the mother. There's a soulful OB, right? Because they're out there. So I don't know. Piece of jewel. There's so much more to answer that question.
And I'm very much involved in prenatal yoga education as well, and I would say prenatal yoga is something you might look at as a way to develop both the mind, body, hormonal, emotional, and spiritual resilience that goes into it. It can help you navigate that course.
Yes. First of all, I want to thank the panel and Cara for writing the book and being a part of the documentary, which I think has opened up such a dialogue and a conversation that a lot of women, including me, didn't really hear about before any of this came about. So thank you. And one question that has come up for me when I read the book was, what is the role of the midwife? If a hospital transfer is necessary, it wasn't really clear. Is the midwife still the primary care provider, and does it matter? Is the certifications, with the certifications that were mentioned, does that differentiate the woman's role, the midwife's role?
I'm going to just repeat it because we're taping it. But the question is, what is the midwife's role if there is a hospital transfer?
Well, a midwife can actually establish different relationships with the backup hospital. She can choose to have privileges or not to have privileges at the hospital. If she has privileges, she's more likely to be making judgment calls within her jurisdiction, her clinical scope of practice when she gets to the hospital. So for example, I go on all my transfers, which are very rare, but I choose not to have hospital privileges, but I certainly could. I have that legal and professional right. And that's a personal choice, because my feeling is when I get to the hospital, I'm there for obstetrical care. But there are midwives who choose to have privileges, and then they're at least officially more in the role of making